He was a millionaire who had everything: wealth, power, a mansion bigger than most could dream of. But behind those walls, he lived in complete darkness, alone, broken, and trapped in the shadows of his past. Until one day, a simple maid walked into his home and changed everything forever. The mansion stood tall on the outskirts of town, a vast structure covered in ivy and silence. Its windows, draped with thick velvet curtains, never allowed sunlight to touch the rooms. Darkness clung to every hallway like an uninvited guest that refused to leave. The air inside was heavy, carrying the scent of old wood and dust. For outsiders, it was a palace of wealth. For Richard, it was a prison. Richard sat in his favorite leather chair by the fireplace, staring into flames that barely flickered. The warmth reached the room, but it never reached his heart. Portraits of his ancestors hung on the walls, their stern faces watching him silently. They reminded him of a family legacy he no longer cared to honor. His fortune surrounded him, yet he felt more impoverished than ever. The halls stretched endlessly, lined with marble floors that echoed with each step. Richard rarely walked them, preferring to stay in his study, where the world could not intrude. His days blurred together, marked only by meals and the slow passage of time. Nights were even worse, filled with restless sleep and haunting memories. The mansion had become a shell, lifeless and cold. Years ago, the house had been alive with voices, music, and laughter. His late wife, Elizabeth, had brought warmth that no fire could replicate. With her gone, the silence swallowed everything whole. Richard had shut the doors to rooms that once brought him joy. Now, they remained locked, holding only dust and sorrow. He preferred not to remember what he had lost. Servants came and went, never lasting long under his sharp gaze and stricter rules. They whispered among themselves about his temper and the darkness of the house. None dared to challenge his isolation, fearing his wrath more than his loneliness. Richard dismissed them easily, believing he needed no one. The fewer people around him, the fewer chances of pain. Mr. Collins, his loyal administrator, was one of the few who stayed. A man of patience and quiet wisdom, Collins managed the mansion's affairs with care. He saw the decline in Richard's spirit, but respected his boundaries. Yet, in his heart, he knew his employer could not live like this forever. He worried the mansion's shadows were consuming more than just its master. Richard's wealth continued to grow, but joy did not follow. Investments, properties, and accounts filled his days with endless paperwork. None of it mattered when he returned to an empty home. Nights were long, and conversations were scarce. Silence had become his constant companion, and solitude his only shield. As autumn settled in, the mansion grew colder. Leaves scattered across the grounds, ignored by the absent master of the house. Richard rarely stepped outside, preferring to watch the world from behind glass. He had built walls higher than any stone structure, invisible but impenetrable. No one dared to climb them, and he welcomed that fact. The villagers nearby spoke of the House of Shadows. Children avoided its gates, and neighbors only whispered its stories. They said the mansion was cursed, drained of all happiness by its bitter owner. Richard heard these tales and did not care to correct them. Perhaps it was better if people feared him than pitied him. Yet within him, a small part longed for something more. A faint memory of warmth still lingered, buried under layers of grief. He ignored it, telling himself it was weakness to desire companionship again. His heart was a locked chamber, just like many of the rooms in the mansion. Still, fate was about to bring an unexpected light into his darkness. If this story already touched your heart, imagine what's still to come. Don't miss it. Subscribe now and stay with us on this journey. Mr. Collins observed Richard's decline with growing concern. He knew the mansion needed more than caretakers. It needed life again. Against Richard's protests, he arranged for a new maid to join the household. Her name was Emily, a young woman known for her resilience and warmth. Collins believed she was the only one who could endure the mansion's shadows. Emily arrived on a chilly morning, her steps light but determined. She carried a modest suitcase and a hopeful heart. Her eyes widened at the sight of the towering mansion, both magnificent and intimidating. Though nervous, she felt a quiet strength within herself. She whispered a promise to face whatever waited inside. Richard's first impression of Emily was dismissive. He regarded her with cold eyes and curt instructions. He warned her that the house demanded order and silence. "Do your work and keep to yourself," he told her sternly. Emily nodded politely, but her spirit was not so easily subdued. Her first tasks seemed simple: dusting shelves, polishing silver, opening windows. But each action felt like a rebellion against the mansion's gloom. Sunlight crept in where she pulled curtains apart. Fresh air entered rooms that had suffocated in silence. For the first time in years, the house breathed again. Richard noticed these changes and grew unsettled. He disliked the brightness, the noise, and the sense of intrusion. Shadows had been his allies, and Emily was scattering them. His irritation grew, though he struggled to voice why. Deep inside, he feared what these small changes might awaken. Emily, however, remained undeterred. She moved through the halls with quiet grace, her presence soft but persistent. She greeted Richard each morning with a smile, though he rarely responded. Her humming filled the silence like a gentle melody. It reminded him of sounds he had tried to forget. Mr. Collins watched carefully, pleased with Emily's subtle defiance. He saw how she brought warmth into places long abandoned. He hoped Richard would one day realize the gift she carried. But he also feared the master's temper would push her away. It was a delicate balance between light and shadow. Richard grew increasingly conflicted. Part of him wanted to dismiss Emily at once, to preserve the silence. Yet another part, buried deep, lingered on her presence. He caught himself listening for her voice in the distance. Her energy irritated him, but it also kept him from drowning entirely. Emily noticed Richard's struggle, but chose patience. She understood grief, though her story remained untold. She saw loneliness in his eyes, even when he hid behind anger. Instead of retreating, she offered kindness in small doses. A smile, a gentle word, a song hummed under her breath. The mansion was no longer only Richard's fortress of solitude. With Emily's arrival, it began to shift, room by room, moment by moment. Change unsettled him, but it was already too late. Light had entered, and with it, a challenge to the life he thought he wanted. The shadows had begun to retreat. Emily began her work with quiet determination, moving through the halls with grace. She noticed how every corner of the mansion seemed untouched by joy. Instead of being intimidated, she found opportunities to bring warmth. A vase of flowers here, a curtain drawn back there. Each small gesture pushed against the weight of shadows. Richard quickly noticed the changes and grew tense. He had spent years perfecting his solitude, and now it was slipping away. The brightness unsettled him more than he cared to admit. He scolded Emily for humming while she worked, his voice sharp, but her smile in response only deepened his unease. Despite his coldness, Emily continued with quiet resilience. Her humming filled the halls like a melody forgotten by time. Richard found himself listening when he thought he shouldn't. The sound tugged at old memories he had buried long ago. Against his will, those notes stirred feelings he thought were gone forever. Mr. Collins watched with subtle satisfaction. He saw Richard's irritation, but also his inability to ignore Emily. The administrator sensed the first cracks in his employer's armor. Perhaps light needs only the smallest crack to enter, he thought. Still, he worried Richard's pride might ruin the progress being made. One evening, Richard caught himself lingering at his study door. Emily's song floated from down the hall, calm and tender. For a moment, he closed his eyes, letting it wash over him. Then anger surged, and he slammed the door shut. Yet even then, the melody remained in his mind, refusing to fade. Determined to reassert control, Richard imposed new rules. Emily was to keep quiet, follow orders, and avoid certain rooms. His words were cold, clipped, and final. He hoped to smother the energy she brought into the mansion, but Emily only nodded and carried on with calm persistence. She opened windows when Richard wasn't looking, letting fresh air into stale rooms. She placed flowers in corners that had long been bare. Her touch softened the edges of the mansion's gloom. It was subtle but undeniable, and Richard could not stop it. For every rule he created, Emily found a way around it. Frustration grew inside him like a storm. He saw her defiance not as rebellion, but as danger. Allowing her warmth felt like opening a door he had sworn shut. Yet he also realized her presence kept the silence at bay. He was torn between pushing her out and letting her stay. Emily noticed his conflict, but said nothing. She respected his pain, though she did not fully understand it. Instead of confrontation, she offered patience and kindness. Her gentle persistence was stronger than any harsh word he gave. The mansion slowly began to breathe again, despite his resistance. Richard sat alone at night, staring into the fire. He replayed Emily's small gestures in his mind, trying to dismiss them. But each memory lingered, like sparks refusing to die out. He told himself he hated her light, yet part of him longed for it. For the first time in years, his fortress felt less secure. The days passed, and Emily's presence became impossible to ignore. She moved with quiet confidence, reshaping the mansion little by little. Curtains were drawn open, letting sunlight spill across marble floors. Dusty rooms found new life under her touch. What once felt like a tomb now carried whispers of warmth. Richard, however, viewed these changes with suspicion. He saw brightness as intrusion, a threat to the order he had built. Shadows had been his allies, and now they retreated against his will. Every flower, every open window unsettled him deeply. Yet he could not deny the subtle shift in the air. Mr. Collins noticed the difference most of all. He saw the mansion breathe again, no longer weighed down entirely by silence. Emily's efforts, though simple, carried profound impact. For the first time in years, laughter seemed possible in those halls. He hoped Richard would eventually see it too. Emily herself felt the weight of her task. She understood Richard's coldness was not hatred, but pain. His eyes carried the burden of a man haunted by loss. Rather than pity, she offered steady kindness. She chose not to fight his walls directly, but to plant seeds of light. Richard sat alone one evening, staring at a vase of flowers Emily had placed. He wanted to remove them, yet his hand froze mid-air. Their colors stirred memories of Elizabeth, memories he avoided. For the first time in years, grief and beauty collided within him, and he could not tell if it was unbearable or healing. One afternoon, while cleaning, Emily stumbled upon a door tightly locked. Curiosity pulled her closer, sensing a story hidden behind it. The door's paint was chipped, its handle cold with neglect. She asked Mr. Collins about it, but his silence was telling. "Some doors," he said softly, "are not meant to be opened." But fate had other plans. Days later, Richard forgot to lock it after entering. Emily, unaware, stepped inside. The room was filled with relics of a life long gone. Photographs of Elizabeth, her dresses, and her piano stood frozen in time. Dust covered everything, yet love still lingered in the air. Richard found her standing there, her hand gently brushing the piano keys. His anger erupted like fire, his voice thundering through the halls. "You had no right," he roared, his face twisted with pain. Emily apologized, but her eyes were full of compassion. She had seen not just relics, but the heart he tried to hide. The fury consumed him, yet beneath it was fear. That room was his last refuge of memory, a place untouched by anyone. Emily's presence there felt like betrayal, though she meant no harm. She had crossed into his deepest wound. Richard's pride demanded distance, but his heart trembled with vulnerability. Emily left quietly, her steps heavy with regret. She had not meant to wound him, only to understand. Yet she had uncovered the secret at the mansion's core, his grief. The shadows seemed heavier that night, pressing down harder than before. Richard sat alone in that room, anger masking sorrow. For the first time, the walls he built began to crack. Richard's fury echoed long after Emily left the locked room. He paced the hall, his chest tight, his mind consumed with memories. Elizabeth's laughter haunted him, mingling with the sting of betrayal. He wanted to dismiss Emily immediately, to erase her intrusion. Yet something in her gentle eyes lingered within him. That night, Richard avoided sleep sitting in the shadowed study. He clutched an old photograph of Elizabeth, unable to let go. The room around him felt heavier than ever, suffocating in its silence. Emily's compassion had stirred emotions he buried too deeply. The pain was sharp, but beneath it, something fragile began to stir. Emily, in her quarters, fought tears of her own. She regretted crossing boundaries, but refused to see Richard only as anger. His grief was a wound, raw and unhealed, and she had touched it. Instead of retreating, she promised herself patience. She would not abandon him to the shadows. Mr. Collins sensed the storm brewing in the house. He knew Richard's anger was born from fear, not cruelty. Emily had seen what no one else dared approach: the truth of his suffering. Collins encouraged her quietly, reminding her of her strength. "Do not let his pain frighten you away," he said. Days passed with heavy silence between Richard and Emily. He avoided her gaze, his pride still burning. Yet he noticed her continuing her work, steady and kind. She did not withdraw, though he gave her every reason. Slowly, her persistence began to break through the cracks of his grief. The mansion felt like a battlefield, though no words were spoken. Richard kept to his study, brooding in solitude. Emily moved through the halls, careful but unyielding. Each open window, each soft song was an act of quiet defiance. The shadows resisted, but she refused to surrender. Richard's anger simmered beneath the surface. He wanted to command her to stop, to restore the silence. But each time, the words caught in his throat. He was not ready to admit that her presence eased his loneliness. Instead, he clung to irritation as his armor. Pride was easier than vulnerability. Emily sensed his conflict and chose a gentler path. She greeted him warmly each morning, even when ignored. She tended to the house as if it were alive, not a tomb. Her kindness was quiet, but relentless. She hoped that one day he would see it not as intrusion, but as healing. Mr. Collins, ever observant, recognized the subtle shift. Richard, though resistant, no longer dismissed Emily outright. He lingered longer in rooms where she worked, though he never admitted why. Collins smiled inwardly, knowing change often began in silence. The mansion was breathing again, and so, slowly, was its master. At night, Richard found himself listening for Emily's presence. Her humming drifted through the halls, soft and steady. It frustrated him that he longed for it, yet he could not deny the comfort it brought. His heart waged war against itself, grief against hope. The battle raged quietly, but the light was winning ground. One afternoon, Emily paused her work and found Richard in the library. He sat with a book open, though his eyes were far away. Gathering courage, she spoke gently about her own past. She shared how she had lost her parents young and learned to endure. Her voice was calm, but her words carried quiet strength. Richard listened reluctantly at first, his guard firmly in place. yet something in her tone pierced the silence he had built. Her pain mirrored his in a way he could not ignore. He recognized the courage it took for her to share. Against his will, he felt the first stirrings of empathy. Emily did not expect a response, only understanding. She left her story in the air, like a candle left burning. For the first time, Richard saw her not just as a maid, but as a person. Her resilience reminded him of what he had long forgotten. The mansion seemed less silent that evening. Mr. Collins observed the moment from afar, hopeful. He had known Emily's story, but hearing it spoken changed everything. Richard had always respected strength, and now he saw it in her. Collins prayed this was the beginning of something deeper. Perhaps Richard could finally see the light beyond his grief. That night, Richard lingered by the fireplace with a strange restlessness. He replayed Emily's words in his mind, turning them over like stones. Her courage unsettled him, yet gave him comfort. For the first time in years, he did not feel entirely alone. The smallest ray of connection had broken through. News came one morning that shook the mansion's fragile balance. Margaret, Richard's estranged sister, had written requesting a visit. It'd been years since they had spoken. Years filled with silence and bitterness. Richard frowned at the letter, his heart tightening with old wounds. He wanted to ignore it, but something held him back. Emily noticed his unease and asked softly about the letter. Richard dismissed her at first, unwilling to revisit painful memories. Yet the truth pressed at him until he spoke. He revealed how arguments over family business had torn them apart. Margaret's betrayal had left him bitter and withdrawn. Mr. Collins urged Richard to allow the meeting. "Old wounds cannot heal if left to fester," he said. Richard resisted, but Emily's quiet encouragement weighed on him. Her belief that reconciliation was possible unsettled him. Against his instincts, he agreed to see his sister again. The day of Margaret's arrival filled the mansion with tension. Emily prepared the house carefully, adding warmth where shadows lingered. Richard, however, stood by the window, brooding in silence. He feared seeing her would reopen scars too deep to mend. Still, a part of him longed for peace after years of division. When Margaret finally stepped through the doors, the air shifted. Her face, older and softened by time, carried both regret and hope. Richard's heart clenched as he met her eyes after so long. The silence between them spoke louder than words. The mansion, once only a tomb of grief, now held the weight of a new reckoning. The reunion with Margaret unsettled Richard more than he admitted. Old wounds resurfaced with every glance, every hesitant word. Their shared history of betrayal and silence hung between them like a ghost. Richard struggled to maintain composure, his pride keeping him distant. Yet inside, his heart ached with both anger and longing. Emily sensed the storm beneath his calm exterior. She treated Margaret kindly, offering warmth the siblings could not give each other. Richard noticed her patience but could not understand it. How could she show compassion so freely when he could not? Her strength silently challenged his own weakness. Margaret tried to explain her choices of the past. She admitted to mistakes, her voice trembling with sincerity. Richard wanted to believe her, but doubt clung tightly. Trust once broken was not easily restored. His silence became both shield and sword in their fragile conversation. That night, Richard walked alone through the darkened halls. Every corner of the mansion seemed alive with memories of family once close. He wondered if reconciliation was possible, or if the past would always bind them. Emily's presence was the only thing keeping him tethered to hope. He did not yet realize how much he depended on her. Mr. Collins observed the unfolding tension with caution. He knew this reunion could either heal or deepen the wounds. Richard stood at a crossroads, though he refused to admit it. The mansion itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting for resolution. Shadows loomed, but a glimmer of light persisted. The days following Margaret's arrival grew heavy with unspoken words. Richard avoided both his sister and Emily, retreating further into silence. Emily, however, continued her quiet defiance, filling the house with small acts of warmth. Her persistence irritated him even more, pressing against his walls. Something inside him snapped. One evening, Richard confronted Emily in the study. His voice was sharp, his anger spilling like fire. He accused her of meddling in matters beyond her place. He claimed she had no right to open wounds he had chosen to seal. The harshness of his words cut deeper than he intended. Emily stood her ground, though her eyes filled with pain. She reminded him gently that healing required facing the past. Her words were not meant to wound, but to help him see. Richard turned away, consumed by pride and fear. He could not bear the vulnerability she demanded of him. In that moment, Emily considered leaving the mansion. She had offered patience, kindness, and light, but his anger weighed heavy. Doubt crept into her heart. Perhaps she had gone too far. Yet she also knew that walking away would condemn Richard to endless shadows. The choice tore at her soul. Richard spent that night alone, his rage slowly turning to regret. He replayed the argument in his mind, hearing Emily's voice echo. Beneath his anger was fear, fear of losing again, fear of feeling again. The walls he had built trembled under the weight of her compassion, and for the first time he feared the silence returning without her. Richard awoke the next morning with a heavy heart. The silence of the mansion felt different this time, colder, emptier. Emily's absence from his thoughts was unbearable, though she was still there. He realized her presence had become a light he had unknowingly relied on. Without it, the shadows threatened to consume him again. He wandered through the halls, his footsteps echoing in the emptiness. Memories of Elizabeth weighed heavily, mixing with his guilt toward Emily. For years, he had chosen solitude over vulnerability, but Emily had shown him another path, one he feared to walk. Now he faced the truth. His pride had cost him too much. In the locked room, Richard sat staring at Elizabeth's piano. His anger had always guarded this space, but tonight it revealed only sorrow. He whispered apologies to the memory of his wife, tears blurring his vision. He admitted aloud that he was afraid of loving again. His grief was real, but so was his longing to live. Mr. Collins found him there, weary and broken. He placed a gentle hand on Richard's shoulder, offering no lecture, only presence. "The house cannot breathe without light," he said quietly. Richard closed his eyes, absorbing the words. Deep down, he knew Collins was right. The choice to change was his alone. For the first time in years, Richard allowed himself to imagine a different future. Not one without grief, but one where grief could coexist with hope. Emily's patience, her warmth, had shown him what he had lost. And now he feared losing it again more than anything. He faced the darkness, knowing it was time to choose. The following day, Richard sought Emily with hesitant steps. She was in the garden, tending to flowers she had planted quietly. He stood for a long moment, watching her care for life he had ignored. For the first time, he saw her not as a servant, but as the heart of the house. Gathering courage, he approached her. His words were halting, but sincere. He apologized for his anger, for his coldness, for shutting her out. Emily listened in silence, her hands resting on the soil. When she looked up, her eyes held no judgment, only compassion. "I only wanted to help you live again," she whispered. Her words pierced him deeper than any anger could. Richard admitted the truth he had long denied. He confessed that he was afraid not of her, but of feeling again. Loving meant risking loss, and loss was unbearable. But living without love was a shadow he could no longer endure. Emily's presence had already changed him more than he realized. Mr. Collins, watching from afar, felt relief wash over him. For years, He had worried Richard's heart would wither beyond saving. Now he saw the first genuine spark of humility and hope. The mansion seemed to exhale, its walls lighter, its rooms brighter. Even Margaret noticed the difference, her heart softening toward her brother. That night, Richard sat by the fireplace, Emily nearby. The silence between them was no longer empty, but peaceful. He felt the weight of choice lifting from his shoulders. For the first time, he had chosen light over darkness, and though the journey was far from over, he was no longer alone. The mansion, once shrouded in silence, began to change. Windows remained open, letting in sunlight and fresh air. Flowers bloomed in the garden, their colors bright against the stone walls. Laughter occasionally echoed through the halls, carried by Emily and even Margaret. The house was no longer a tomb of memories, it was alive again. Richard felt the change within himself as much as around him. He walked the halls with lighter steps, no longer avoiding the rooms of the past. Grief still lingered, but it no longer held him captive. Emily's presence had shown him that sorrow and hope could coexist. For the first time in years, he embraced life rather than hiding from it. Margaret's return added to the transformation. Though scars of betrayal remained, forgiveness slowly took root. She and Richard began to speak honestly, rebuilding a bond long broken. Emily often served as the quiet bridge between them, her kindness smoothing rough edges. Family once lost was beginning to take shape again. Mr. Collins smiled as he observed the rebirth of the household. He had served Richard faithfully through years of silence, but now he witnessed renewal. The mansion seemed warmer, as if the very walls had shed their shadows. Collins knew Emily had not just changed Richard's life, she had saved it. Gratitude filled his heart. As winter approached, Richard sat by the fire, Emily beside him. He looked around the room, no longer haunted by emptiness. The shadows were still there, but they no longer ruled. He leaned back, whispering softly, "This is home again." And with Emily's quiet smile, he knew the light would never leave. Richard's mansion, once a prison of shadows, was reborn with light, hope, and second chances. This story reminds us that no amount of wealth can replace the power of kindness. What about you? Do you believe one person can truly change a life? Share your thoughts in the comments, leave a like, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspirational millionaire stories.